I'm an artificial intelligence researcher, and I also work in development of electronic embedded systems for products for the consumer market, things like chess computers. In my youth, I was a very keen chess player. I started at the age of 8, and I played in a lot of competitions at school and became reasonably capable. When I went to university, I got into the Scottish chess team and became an international master and won the Scottish Championship. When I graduated from St Andrews University, I went to Glasgow, where I worked in the computer science department, and I started in Glasgow in October 1967. As soon as I got to Glasgow, I discovered that there had been a certain amount of research conducted into enabling computers to play chess, which I thought was very interesting. During the course of my initial interest in the subject, I met Donald Mickey in Edinburgh. Donald Mickey was one of the founding fathers of AI in the United Kingdom, and Donald knew everybody in the world who was in artificial intelligence. And Donald and I became quite good friends, and he would invite me from time to time to Edinburgh to some of his machine intelligence workshops, as they were called, little conferences where I would meet some of the luminaries of the AI world. As time went on, I just got more and more involved in computer chess and met more and more people in the world of AI. Gradually, it became, I suppose, my main interest. I was fortunate enough to be given a summer scholarship by IBM in 1971. I travelled to the States, where I went around meeting everyone who had worked up till that time on computer chess, including people like Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy. I slept on his waterbed in California. I met Richard Greenblatt, who had developed the McHack program, which was the first really well-known chess program. McHack played in a human tournament in the Boston area in the mid-60s, and played something like recognizable chess. So I met everybody who had done any work in the field. I was also invited to be the compere and tournament director of the second North American Computer Chess Championship in 1971. That was an event that had been started by the ACM the previous year, and it ran for 24 years. And it was really because of those tournaments that computer chess advanced so much, because what would happen was that the best programmers of the time would get together once a year. They would play their programs against each other to see which was the best and win the competition. But they would also discuss their ideas for improving their programs, and then they'd go away and work on their programs and try and improve them for the next year. I'm absolutely certain it was the impetus created by those tournaments that enabled computer chess to make progress in the way it did. Of course, in the early days, computer chess was very infantile. If you were a strong chess player and you watched the best programs playing, many of the moves were laughable. But as time went on, the strength of the programs grew bit by bit. It took a long time before they were playing anything like what a human master would call decent chess. I remember in 1977, the first really prophetic statement on this was made by Monty Newborn, who was one of the other organisers of the most important computer chess events. And Monty said that chess masters used to come to our tournaments to laugh. Now they come to watch. Soon they will come to learn. And he was absolutely right, because it was within about 10 or 12 years of then that the first program started to beat grandmasters, and grandmasters started to learn from the things that programs could do which humans couldn't do. The match I played with Deep Blue, Deep Thought as it was at the time, an early version, this came out of a bet I started in 1968. It was the first time I'd been to one of Donald Mickey's machine intelligence workshops in Edinburgh, and there was a cocktail party during the event one evening, and John McCarthy was there, and he knew I played chess, so he asked me if I'd like to play him a game. So I played John, beat him. He was a sort of, what I would describe as an amateur player, but he was a very decent amateur player. And after the game was over, he said, "Well, David, you might be able to beat me, but within 10 years there'll be a program that can beat you." And I said, "Well, that's ridiculous, John. I'm so much stronger than the best programs now. It's impossible." And so we discussed this for a few minutes, and I've always been a bit inclined to make a bet. And I said to him, "I'll tell you what, John, I'll make you a bet that there isn't a program that can beat me within 10 years. And he said, "How much would you like to bet?" So I rather rashly said £500. Now, at that time, I was earning £895 a year, so it was more than half a year's salary. And John called over to Donald Mickey, who was sitting on the floor a few feet away from us, and told Donald what was going on. And Donald said, "Oh, can I have half that bet, John?" And so they agreed. They took the bet, they shared it between them. And a couple of other people jumped on the bandwagon the following year and the year after that. And in the end, the bet got up to £1,250. At the end of the 10 years, I played a match in Toronto at the Canadian National Exhibition in August 1978 against the program which was then the current world champion. It was developed at Northwestern University. And in terms of what had gone before, it was quite a decent program, but I won the match fairly comfortably. So I collected the bet, and I, apart from one of the professors who welched on me, but the other three all paid up. Seymour Papert was one of the professors. He paid up. Donald Mickey, of course, paid. John McCarthy paid, and he wrote me a very nice letter saying he didn't mind losing because when he made the bet, he expected me to lose to a program that could think intelligently in the way a human does. And the fact that the best programs of the time were all brute force programs made him sort of lose interest to some extent in the way that the research was going, so he didn't feel bad about losing. Anyway, so I won the first bet, and then I was at another computer conference talking to Dan McCracken, who wrote a lot of books, Fortran books and other books on computer science in those days. And he said, "Oh, you couldn't do it again." I said, "Well, I'll make the same bet with you if you like for 5 years." And I bet him $1,000. And at the end of the 5 years, I played another match against the program, which at the time was considered to be the strongest around. And I won that match very convincingly, 4-0. And by then, I could see the writing on the wall, because although I was still clearly stronger than the best programs, it was obvious to me that they were getting better, and they were getting better faster than they had been. And already programs were beginning to take part in human tournaments and win occasional games of speed chess against grandmasters. So I thought, well, I can't make the same bet again. But on the other hand, I'd been a target for chess programmers for many years, and I didn't really want to remove the target. I thought that would be a bit unfair on all the people who'd been researching the field. So I was put in touch with a magazine called Omni, which was just about to start up. It's a sort of Science for Everybody magazine. They were interested in my bet, and I said, "Look, I don't want to make another bet, but what I'd like to do is to offer a prize." I said, "I'll put up $1,000 if you put up $4,000, and we'll give the $5,000 to the first program that beats me in a match, whenever it is. It doesn't matter if it's next year or 10 years." They liked the idea, so they agreed to do it. I had one challenge against me, which was not strong enough. I played a 2-game match. I think it was at Carnegie Mellon against an MIT program, and I won that easily. But then along came a program that was at first called Chip Test, and then it was called Deep Thought. That program was really strong. It was developed initially at Carnegie Mellon, and one of the reasons it was strong was that the hardware was special purpose hardware, which implemented in electronics a lot of the repetitious tasks performed usually by software, and so it was much faster. And the guy who was in charge of the hardware development is a Taiwanese student called Feng Xu. He knew almost nothing about chess. He barely knew how the pieces moved. It was really quite interesting, but he was a brilliant computer scientist and electronic engineer. And they developed this program to the point where they entered it into some very strong open chess tournaments. By open, I mean anyone can play. So you had grandmasters playing and you had weaker players playing. And there was a tournament in Long Beach in California where their program actually won against 2 or 3 grandmasters, including Bent Larsen, who was one of the strongest players in the world. Also finished ahead of Mikhail Tal, who had been a world champion. So it was obviously doing very well. And around that time, IBM got interested, and they hired the whole team. They hired the whole of all the key people in the Carnegie Mellon team. And they made an announcement they were going to put $5 million into this, and they were going to put $3 million into it, and within 5 years they would have a world champion program or something like that. Anyway, they spent a lot more than they'd expected, but they did in the end, as you know, have a program that was good enough to challenge Kasparov. I've known Kasparov for a long time, so they asked me if I could negotiate for a match between them and him, which I did. I knew his manager very well, I knew Garry. So we set up the first match, which was held in Philadelphia in 1996. And it was quite a sensation because Garry lost the first game. And when he lost the first game, IBM's stock rose $4. Garry won the match in the end, but it was tough. And he could see that the program was strong. And they challenged him to a rematch in New York the following year, and you know the result. It destroyed him in the end. He won the first game, which surprised everybody. A lot of people were expecting him to lose horribly. But even though he won the first game, the match went badly for him, and he got to the point that he was psychologically destroyed before the final game, and he played horribly in the final game and lost. He took over on behalf of mankind where I left off when I lost to the earlier version of Deep Blue. Certainly they're getting better. We still organise World Computer Chess Championships every year, and it's noticeable that the strength is increasing. The best programs now are so much better than the top grandmasters that even if Magnus Carlsen, who's the current world champion and the new wonderkind of chess, he's the strongest chess player that's ever lived, if he were to play a match against one of the top programs, he would be destroyed. And they're certainly getting better. There have been quite a lot of advances in software, but it's also the hardware. The hardware does make a difference, because when a program is searching to the phenomenal depths that they search nowadays, they eradicate so many errors of types that were common, even 10 years ago, that the play gets as close to perfect as possible. And one of the main problems faced by grandmasters is this. This was something pointed out by Kasparov. If Kasparov or a top human grandmaster is playing against a human player and makes a mistake, a sort of normal grandmasterly mistake, where the value of his position goes down by a quarter of a pawn or half a pawn or even 3/4 of a pawn, he can usually expect his opponent's going to make a mistake back at some point, because no one's perfect. But with the computer, you can't expect that. With the top computer programs, they don't. So the human is under absolutely massive pressure, and it's a kind of relentlessness. You know that when the score for your position, when the merit of your position slips a bit, you can't grab it back through a mistake by your opponent. And that makes life really difficult for the top grandmasters, and it's getting more and more difficult as time goes on. Yes, I do, because one of my activities is I'm president of the International Computer Games Association, and every year we organise not only the World Computer Chess Championship, but we organise also tournaments for computer programs playing other games, and Go is one of the most popular. We had our tournament this year, for example, in Japan, in Yokohama. One of the great things about the game of Go is that the ranking system in Go allows you to give a handicap that accurately represents the difference in strength between you. So it means that if you're a world-class Go player and I'm a ranked beginner, you know my rating and you know your rating. You know exactly how many stones to give me to make it a more or less even game, so we can both enjoy it. What's interesting in Go is that there's been a lot of progress in the last decade. The amazing thing is that the progress came about through a method that's completely counterintuitive called Monte Carlo tree search, in which essentially the programs try out every move that they can make, and then having tried out a move, they then generate millions and millions of games with random moves for both sides, and they look at the results of those games. And it turns out that the move whose random continuations gets the highest score turns out quite often to be the best move. And through this Monte Carlo technique, the best Go programs are now at a stage where they can give a few stones handicap to a top Go player, a world-class Go player, and beat him. And this has happened quite recently, much to the amazement of the top Go players. I would guess we're 20 years away from having a Go program that can play at a level equivalent to Kasparov or Carlsen. Well, the idea came to me when I was actually researching a previous book. I wrote a book called Robots Unlimited, which is a kind of AI primer. The purpose of that book was to explain to the person in the street what AI was capable of and how it worked. So I covered all sorts of different aspects of AI, and one of the aspects I was looking at was sort of relationships between humans and computers, or between humans and robots. And during the course of my research, I came across a book written by an MIT professor called Garry Turkle. The book was called The Second Self, and it had actually been published in 1984. I didn't come across it till 2003. I found it fascinating. What Garry Turkle did was to investigate in the early and mid-80s what effect computer technology was likely to have on us as social beings. One of the things she did was to wander around MIT, where obviously there were a lot of very smart people working on computers, even in those days. And she was asking people what they felt about their relationship with their computer. One of the people she asked was a student who she called Anthony. And Anthony said something which I found really quite amazing. He said, "I've tried having girlfriends, but I prefer my relationship with my computer." And the reason he preferred his relationship with his computer was that he regarded society as being inherently unreliable. You can't count on society. You can't count on the person you're with. You don't know for sure how they're going to react. But you can sure count on your computer. You always know what your computer's going to do. And he liked the security of knowing that. And I thought, well, this was 20 years earlier that Anthony had said this. And I thought, if somebody who's highly intelligent at a place like MIT could have thought that 20 years ago, there must be a lot more people thinking similar things today. So I started researching the whole area. And very quickly I was collecting quite a lot of research articles from learned journals, from conference proceedings, some stuff in books and so on. As the collection of material grew, I had far more than I could use for the chapter in my book, in the Robots Unlimited book. And I thought this would make a really interesting book in its own right. When I decided to write the book, I then immediately thought of the title Love and Sex with Robots, which I thought was a nice, catchy title. Before the book was published, I was talking about the book to a friend of mine who's an AI professor in the Netherlands. He was, at the time, he was at the University of Maastricht. He was head of the computer science department there. He said, "Why don't you convert your book into a PhD thesis? And if you want to do that, we'll make some inquiries and see if the University of Maastricht would be interested in having you as a student." So I said, okay, it sounded interesting, and my mother had always wanted me to do a PhD, and even though she'd passed away by then, I thought, you know, if she's watching from somewhere, she'd be quite happy if I could do this. So I rewrote the whole book as a PhD thesis, and he was one of my supervisors, and he got me a second supervisor who was a woman in the Gender Studies department at Maastricht. And so I wrote this thesis, which I defended about 2 months before the book was published. At the age of 62, I became a doctor. Well, I think things will happen in stages. I've predicted when I wrote my book, and I still believe it to be the case, that by the year 2050, artificial intelligence will be at a point where robots will be able to have, essentially they will be so human-like that we will hardly be able to tell them apart from humans, so that there'll be robot personalities with whom people will be falling in love. People will be having very interesting, stimulating, entertaining and intellectually challenging conversations at any level they wish, at any intellectual level they wish, on any subject they wish, with any type of personality they wish. And all of these possibilities will be possible in computer software and therefore in robots. And in parallel with the AI research necessary to do that and to create emotional computer programs and programs that can carry on conversations, there will also be work in the more physical side of robotics, electromechanical robotics, to create android robots that are in a human-like form. You can already see the work of Professor Ishiguro in Japan. He's the most famous person in his field. He has a classic photograph of him with one of his robots that he built in the likeness of a female Japanese newscaster. And if you look at it in the photograph, you certainly can't tell it isn't human. And he says if you walk into a room with it, you're normally in the room between 5, 10, maybe 20 seconds before you realise that it's not human. But that time span will grow. And by the year 2050, I expect that time span to be, as many hours as one can imagine. Essentially, the only way you'll be able to tell that it's not human is actually by looking inside it or sticking a screwdriver in it or some sort of physical contact that makes it obvious, but at the same time they'll be developing new materials, so that there will be android robots that are not only human-like in appearance and in conversation and in intellectual capabilities, but which will also feel nice. You'll be able to cuddle them, you'll be able to hug them, and you'll be able to have enjoyable sex with them. I think these two paths will be going on side by side until success is achieved in both, by which time they will have merged. In terms of 2025, I think that the physical side will be more advanced than the AI side. I actually believe that the most difficult challenges in this whole thing are going to be related to human-robot conversation. I think the skills, the linguistic skills necessary in computational linguistics, I think are a very, very big challenge indeed. And I think user-independent speech recognition, carried to perfection, is still a long way off. So I think they are the limiting factors in terms of having a robot with whom one can have a sort of seamless conversation in the way that you and I can. But in terms of the physical aspect of robotics, I think sexual robotics, I mean, it's already here. I mean, you go onto Amazon. Amazon is already selling sex machines. There's a site called fuckingmachines.com. They have a whole range of products. It won't be long before the technologies that are used in products like those are merged with the technologies that are used in upmarket silicone dolls. You can buy now, there's a product called Real Doll, made by a company called Abyss Creations. Real Doll, there's already been one or two in movies. You know, there have been characters in movies who've had girlfriends that are real dolls. They look lifelike. You can buy them. You know, you can buy them with big boobs, small boobs. You can have blonde hair, brunette, redhead. You can choose their facial characteristics. Clearly, there are men out there who are buying these at the rate of $400 or $500 a year, and paying between, I think, somewhere in the region of $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 each for them, and they're completely inanimate. You know, they do nothing. They just lie there. If you can imagine merging the technologies of robotics and the artificial intelligence that goes into artificial conversation and artificial emotion, merge all these things together, and this will happen in a sort of gradual path. By 2025, I think we will have human-like looking creations that are still a long way from perfect in both the AI sense and in the electromechanical sense, but which give a much more rewarding experience to the customers of what is now the real doll. And instead of people buying real dolls at $400 or $500 a year, by 2025 I think people will be buying them in their tens of thousands every year. Definitely. I mean, there are all sorts of negative side effects to this trend, and I think it's probably true of just about every advance in science and technology, that no matter how good the advance is, there will be some sort of negatives. A lot of people say to me, for example, isn't it much better to have a relationship with a human than with a robot? And yes, well, of course that's nice, but how many millions of people are there in the world who are lonely because they don't have anyone, they don't have a relationship, they don't have anyone to love, there's no one who loves them, there's no one they can have sex with unless they're prepared to pay for it. There are all these millions and millions of people who are lonely, and for them the question isn't, would it be better to have a relationship with a robot or with a human? For them the question is, would it be better to have a relationship with a robot or no relationship at all? There's another side to this that's quite important. One of the problems I foresee, and I think it could be quite a potentially very serious problem, and it's something that research psychologists need to think about and investigate in the years to come before these products are regularly available, is this: that when robots are developed that are sexually empowered and have been programmed with the knowledge of sexual technique described in all the world's sex manuals, they will be fantastic lovers. And when that happens, I think that a lot of people, men particularly, will naturally suffer from some anxiety, knowing that a woman with whom they're about to embark on in a sexual relationship will have had fantastic sex courtesy of a robot, and the poor guy will be worried, can I do as well? That potentially is a massively serious problem. And as I say, it's a problem that needs to be addressed. I've seen a clip of the Watson thing, and of course I read about it, and it's a remarkable achievement. It doesn't surprise me very much, because I think AI is being headed in the direction of remarkable achievements in all sorts of fields. And that just happens to be one that IBM worked on. IBM, with their resources, I think they can conquer just about any AI problem if they throw enough into it, and I think they will do. This comes back to what I was saying about human-computer conversation being in my opinion, the most difficult aspect of developing a robot personality or robot capability with whom people can fall in love. And I think the two are very closely linked, because I think it's quite difficult. I think for most people, I mean, I'm not talking about people whose intelligence is very strongly limited, but for most people, it's difficult to fall in love with someone unless you can have what for you is a decent conversation with them. So I think we're talking about something between 2040 and 2050, possibly nearer 2050. On the other hand, Ray Kurzweil has said it's going to be 2029. If I thought I was going to be alive in 2029, I would bet him on that he's wrong. I would bet fairly heavily that he's being over-optimistic. I don't believe it's going to happen that way. I think it will happen as a result of big data. You see, one of the things that's really interesting, in my opinion, about what happened in the world of chess, and it goes back to what John McCarthy said to me when I won the bet. He thought that chess would be beaten by an intelligent program that would essentially look at a small tree of the game possibilities, as humans do, but do it much better. What happened was the opposite. The trees got vast. There was a certain amount of intelligence, but it was the vastness of the tree, it was the size of the tree that programs were capable of looking at that actually was the most important factor. In terms of natural language processing, in order to be able to create good conversation and to be able to do things like translation really well, I think it's going to happen as a result of masses and masses of data. Yorick Wilkes, who is one of the world's leading experts in computational linguistics, said to me some years ago, and I think he's right, he said artificial intelligence should be a lot of data and a little software. And I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen, as it wasn't the case with chess, and as it's not proving to be the case with Go. I don't think that human-computer conversation will happen by trying to mimic the way the brain works. I think it'll happen in completely different ways, taking advantage of the massive hardware that's available, the massive amounts of data becoming available, and very fast computer speeds. I think big data is a very promising field. I remember when I started in the consumer electronics business, the cost of 1 kilobyte of ROM was $1, and 1 kilobyte of RAM was $10. Look what it is now.